Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new mini season here on Wild Wild Podcast. And I will go into more detail in a minute as to what we're going to attempt to do. But first of all, I would like to welcome my co-host, Rod Barnett. Hello, Rod.
Hello, Adrian. How have you been doing?
Yeah, it feels like it's been a little bit long since we did this with the summer and everything.
Yeah.
And obviously the last episode that I did, you were not in, for which I apologise.
Oh, no. I mean, I completely understand. The chance to interview Matt Blake was a golden opportunity, and considering how close you guys live as opposed to how far away I am, I completely understand it.
I know, although I still ended up just doing it over the internet, but yeah, so it's been a fun old time, and I'm sure you've been as busy as ever. I know you've put out at least 30 episodes of your podcast since we last spoke.
I do have a couple in the editing bay, but I got 3 out in October. I've got 2 more ready to go out sometime in November. Including one I'm pretty excited about Space 1999, so that's interesting.
Nice. Yeah, I love that show. Oh, very good. Yeah. So busy as ever, and I'm sure you've been cooking up a few more podcasts, commentary tracks, and all of that good stuff.
Well, no new commentary tracks on the horizon. We've still got 2 in the hopper that haven't been released yet. One of which hasn't even been announced yet, so we'll just we'll see how that goes. The one that hasn't come out yet is for Tombs of the Blind Dead. It'll come out eventually.
Yeah. Yes. Who knows? Who knows when? But yeah, in their own good time.
Yeah, good things take time. So.
Yeah, I heard you. I was listening to your podcast episode on Evil Speak.
Oh yeah.
Which is a film I've never seen, but the poster has always amused me. With little Clint Howard in a horror film.
If you can retain that amusement as you watch the film, you will survive. Yes.
Yeah. Because I always think of him as Gentle Ben, of course. Although not actually Gentle Ben, because that was the bear, but the kid in Gentle Ben, whatever his name was. Nobody remembers his name. Just the bear. But anyway, you mentioned me. I got name checked, which I was quite pleased about. Because for some reason you guys got talking about cannibal films. I think it's because you were discussing video nasties.
Oh yeah.
And so you mentioned the very first time I think I appeared on your podcast was to talk about Cannibal Holocaust, and then you started talking about people who like cannibal films should be avoided. And I just wanted to mention that in the next episode, the next issue of Scream magazine, that's the American Scream with a double E, not the British Scream, there will be a full, 2 or 3 page article by me on cannibal films. So where I attempt to try and explain and perhaps slightly justify the Italian cannibal cycle. So maybe I'm one of those friends that people have to avoid. I don't know.
No, not necessarily. I think you have a way of coming at it that explains and shall we say elucidates why you would be interested in these things. Don't get me wrong. I'm one of those people who's interested in them as well. I'm tarring myself with that same brush, but the thing that I would be more concerned about are those people, and there are a few of them who seem content to watch and rewatch things like Cannibal Holocaust or Cannibal Ferox on some kind of ridiculous endless loop, as if that is the most entertaining thing in the world. And it's like, this speaks more to you than it does to the filmmakers, I think. So.
Yeah, I mean, writing that article, maybe one day we'll fit in a couple, but I'm not sure we'll do a whole season. But I do think they're interesting. They're very interesting films.
I just think the more interesting ones are the ones that have something slightly elevated to say. I mean, they're essentially trying. They're not skimping on the horrors of what they're presenting or the more ridiculous, over the top exploitation gore elements, but they're also not just throwing it at the camera and then going home for dinner. They're trying to have something behind what they're doing, as opposed to just churning out something ridiculous so that the masses will throw money at them. Those are there are a number of cannibal films that are worthy of actual study.
Now, speaking of churning out ridiculous things to make money, that brings us nicely to our new mini season.
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah. So what I decided, I thought it would be fun to just really, perhaps just over the next 3 episodes, we're going to talk about the films they've got various different names, but the one I think we'll go with is Decamerotica or Decamerotici. But basically, when Pasolini made his trilogy of life in the early 1970s with Il Decameron and then the Canterbury Tales and Arabian Nights, the Decameron, which came out in 1971, inspired dozens of Italian filmmakers to produce their own versions of stories from Decameron, basically as an excuse. Because I don't know, did you ever see Pasolini's Decameron?
It was years and years ago as part of a kind of a long-term attempt to survey most of the things that were considered Italian art films. So I knew exactly what it was when I went into it, and I think I actually saw Canterbury Tales first.
Right.
For whatever reason, probably just what I could get my hands on. So I'm well aware of what the Decameron was. My feelings about this subgenre are odd and intricate, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. So there are lots of films that came out in the immediate aftermath of Decameron, because basically Decameron was public domain, although Pasolini did try and take one of the, I think there was a film called More Decameron or Decameron Again or something like that, Decameron 2, and he tried to take them to court for plagiarism, but basically it just didn't stand because this is all based on a book from the 1300s.
Yeah, I know. And so, how do you say something that's 600 years old is not, anybody can mine that for film. Yep.
And they did. And he was not very happy about it. So anyway, so then more films came after Canterbury Tales. There's a lot of films based on that, and also Arabian Nights. So what I thought we would do over the next 3 episodes is just take this opportunity to talk about some of those movies. This is another. What I'm trying to do with this podcast is sort of highlight some genres that don't always get a lot of attention, and I think these films in particular, there's very little written about them that I can find anyway. And indeed many of the films are not available to watch in English, so maybe that's why there's not a lot been written about them. But they were a very popular cycle, and they annoyed the hell out of Pasolini. Which we can perhaps talk more about over the next couple of episodes.
Yeah.
So
it does appear to have really embittered him.
It's one thing that I did read. Basically, credits his disappointment at what happened, driving him to make Salo, and so that film, Salo or Silo, I don't know, Salo.
One or the other. We all know what film he's talking about.
Yeah. So read that film, and the anger that he is showing in that movie is fueled in part by his annoyance at what happened because of his trilogy of life. So it's kind of a shame. But anyway, so I went out and did a lot of research to try and find a film that we could talk about that was based on the Decameron. Mm-hmm. And I managed to find some that sounded potentially interesting, and then I had to narrow it down basically to the only one that I could find that had English subtitles, so we could both actually manage to understand it.
I know our hunt for subtitled versions of these films was maddening.
It was a shame, because there are some that are quite intriguing looking, one of which I can talk a little bit about. But anyway, so the film that we did decide to talk about is called Ubalda, also known as Ubalda All Naked and Warm. The actual Italian title, I'll have a go, is Quel, gran, pezzo, della, Ubalda, tutta, nuda e tutta, calda, which roughly translates as it's like this piece of Ubalda, or this, it's really weird. It's
That
like
is
this
weird, yeah.
this piece of Ubalda, or this chunk of Ubalda, all naked and all warm. It doesn't quite
I was about
translate
to say, it sounds very much
very
as
well.
if it sounds like it's a phrase in Italian
Yeah,
that
sure, it makes sense.
that it's something like, that
This big
large
piece of
of
Ubalda.
Ubalda all naked and hot, and it's like,
Yeah,
why are we? It's got to be something very, very intrinsic to the Italian language that
yeah.
we're just never going to get. Yeah.
So no, it's an odd one. So that's the one we picked, and we'll go through that in a moment. So I just wanted to quickly give a very brief background on the Decameron. So it's the author is Giovanni Boccaccio. So he's a 14th century Italian author. The stories were all written and based around, they're written in and based around Florence, which is interesting because Pasolini, when he made his film, he adapted the stories but set them mostly in the south of Italy, around Naples. And apparently that was because he wanted to use the film to highlight the poverty and the sort of working classes and so on. And in Italy, it's the south that is poor, whereas Florence is quite wealthy. So he sort of adapted it to be more relevant to modern day Italy. But I think what's really interesting with Pasolini's film is when you watch it, it feels like he actually went back in time. Like he somehow got cameras back to the 1300s. The film is so extraordinary looking.
Mm-hmm.
It's the closest. I mean, it's a bit like Monty Python's Holy Grail in the way that they just kept slapping more mud onto everything, and it kind of feels like that with Decameron. He's managed to make it look so ancient, and the people that he found to be in it, the teeth of some of those men in that film are quite extraordinarily bad. And I had to keep reminding myself that he was making this film in 1970, but the look of it so perfectly captures this kind of feel of something that is, what is it, 700 years old or something.
Well, I feel as
extraordinary.
And I have nothing to base this on because I was looking for something to kind of back up this thought process of mine when thinking about the Pasolini film. It's almost as if he was reacting against the kind of gloss that you would see in not just Hollywood productions of period pieces, but also the Italian ones as well, where there was this attempt to make things as pretty and kind of shiny and sparkling as you could, because you're essentially making cinema, so you're wanting to make it as attractive visually as possible. And his film very much seems to have been, like I say, I would love to know the thought process, just the attempt to make it look as if we were kind of stepping back in time into the reality of it, where hygiene was not exactly what we would think of it anymore. It's just, there's all this. You talk about how people looked. So you have to. So you take into account 100+ years of people having access to something that doesn't feel like somebody yanking your tooth out just because it looks the wrong color. I mean, these are just the way people looked, felt, and probably, as referenced in some of the stories, smelled. And there was a real attempt by Pasolini to present this almost as if you were, stepping back in time, as if there was a kind of semi-documentary stance that he took on how he filmed this stuff. It's an impressive film on many levels, and the attention to detail is way up there, in my opinion, just from a cinematics point of view.
Yeah. So the original Decameron has 100 stories. So it's quite similar. It's kind of like Italy's version of the Arabian Nights, in just how many, and they're quite short stories in this collection. And so you can see why once Pasolini opened the floodgates with his film, loads of other script writers then went back to the original Decameron and thought, well, hang on, there's at least another 90 stories in here that we could do. But also, and interestingly, one of the films that we could talk about today does actually it's a whole feature film based on one of the short stories that Pasolini did. But anyway, so one of the first films that was really successful to come out of the Decameron genre was our film for today, Ubalda, which came out not that long after Decameron, and stars the Queen of Giallo, but in Italy she was better known as the Queen of Comedy, Edwige Fenech. And I'm guessing you're a fan.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. I've been a fan of Miss Fenech for decades at this point, simply because, of course, being the genre nutcase that I am, of course, I came to her because of the giallo films that she was in. I mean, there's almost no way to avoid her if you start going through those movies. I mean, Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward and All the Colors of the Dark and Your Vice is a Locked Room. I mean, we're talking about film after film after film where you're going to see this woman and you're going to kind of marvel at her. I mean, $5 for an August Moon is another good touchstone.
I love that one.
And Case of the Bloody Iris is one that I'm a big fan of. And of course, once you start delving into the work that she was doing there in the 70s, first of all, if you're at all aware of her, you're aware of how physically beautiful she was and how obviously willing she was to, just walk around without any clothing on whatsoever, which of course is a big plus to producers during that period. And of course it helped that her boyfriend at the time, the man in her life, was an Italian film producer, so who did not mind that his sweetheart was nude in front of literally millions of people. But I did become aware pretty quickly that she was better known in her home country for starring in a lot of comedies. And so I did dip my toes into those just because I'm like, well, hey, it's a chance to see, more of her, quote unquote, and more of her.
How bad can it be?
Exactly. How bad can it be? And I quickly took my toe right back out of that scalding water and moved forward until now.
So this was one you hadn't seen before then?
No. Until you proposed doing this, I had not seen this movie, and it reminds me of all of the good and the bad things about a Fenech starring Italian comedy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So she's the although there's long periods where she is not in it, which is a shame. So the main focus of the film. It's set during the Middle Ages. There's a knight who is coming back from the wars. We're not entirely sure, just some wars. Who knows which ones? He's coming back to his home, to his wife, and he is Olimpio, played by an Italian comedic actor called Pippo Franco, who I did look at. I mean, I've looked at the lists of him and some of the other people in this film.
He made a lot of comedies.
Yeah, I've never heard of any of them. Not a thing.
Yeah. But apparently he was quite the star in this particular genre. Yeah,
and you can see why he is pretty funny.
Yeah, he's a good comedic actor. He's got a persona on screen that works very effectively for this stuff.
And he is next door neighbours with the miller of the village, called Odorissi. And now I recognise this guy, Umberto Dorsi. I was trying to think where I recognised him from, and it's because he has a brief appearance in is it A Quiet Place to Kill, which is the one, I always get those ones mixed up. It's I think it's A Quiet Place to Kill, the one where the young couple are selling porn to fuel their holiday around Italy. Do you remember? Oasis, also known as Oasis of Fear.
Oh yes. Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
With Ornella Muti and Ray Lovelock. Anyway, he's in that as one of the people that she entices to then buy magazines of her. So I sort of recognised him. I was like, where have I seen him before? And then I had to look through, but nothing else. I didn't recognise anything else.
Well, I mean, he is one of those guys who turned up in a lot of different movies. Yeah.
So Olimpio is actually married to a beautiful blonde woman called Fiamma, and to keep her safe during his crusades, he left her at home with a chastity belt. And she's played by Karin Schubert, who I think was German.
Yeah.
And again, lots of films that I don't recognise. But, well, except for she started to get into things like the Black Emanuel films.
True.
And then I read somewhere that she basically got into porn eventually. So
wow, really?
There's one on her list called Erotic Adventures of Little Red Riding Hood, where she plays the grandma. So I don't know.
Interesting. I knew her. She's in the same year she made this, or the same year this film came out. She was in the Richard Burton Bluebeard film.
Oh yeah.
And I knew her from that, and I'd also seen her in The Girl in Room 2A.
Yes.
And several of the Emmanuel films, just because I did a survey of those a long while back, and yeah.
Purely for academic purposes.
No, it was because there were box sets sitting in front of me, and I went, okay, cool.
Oh yeah, fair enough. So she's very attractive, and he is desperate to get in the sack with her after his long campaign. But on his way home, he meets a monk. So I should also say, first of all, I don't think there are any knights in the Decameron film. So they've taken the inspiration from Decameron quite loosely here.
Yeah.
There's no sort of knights, and there's definitely no chastity belts in the Decameron. And this film also looks like a movie, whereas Decameron looks like they took cameras back 700 years. This one looks much more like a film. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. This is
cleaner.
It's not just that. It's also just beautifully photographed. There are some sequences that we'll probably discuss that are cinematically just gorgeous. I mean, they're beautiful looking sequences, and they're very much in the vein of making things as gorgeous as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So any sequence in particular you had in mind there, Rob?
We'll get to it. It involves slow motion. Yes.
Yeah, we've got to be careful with this, because nobody wants to listen to a podcast of two middle-aged men just going on about Edwige Fenech in the nude.
We don't want to give the listener we've
got to be careful how we do this.
We don't want to give them the creeps or the fear that we're possibly doing something we shouldn't be doing while podcasting. No. Yes.
So he's desperate, but she, of course, finds him completely unattractive, and she has a much more handsome man in the village, and she tells him,
she has more than just one.
Well, yeah. So his wife tells him that she made a vow to Saint. Oh, what does she say? Not Saint Chastity.
Oh, it's close to that.
Saint Virtue or something like that.
Yeah.
That she would remain celibate for a week when he got home or something, if he came home safe. Some nonsense that she spins him. Somehow, though, she managed it. And there's a lot of business in this film about keys, and I got very lost as to who had the chastity belt keys at any one time, because I'm pretty sure somehow she gets the key off him because she's having it away with whoever.
Yeah, she's got it. She's got several different keys. Yeah,
she's got the chastity belt off anyway at various points. But meanwhile, he's so frustrated that he can't get what he wants from her that he starts to lust after his neighbour's wife, who is, of course, Ubalda.
And let's just be clear, considering the neighbour's wife is played by Edwige Fenech, it would be difficult. I mean, even if he were, I don't think that it would keep him from casting a lustful gaze in that direction.
No.
So,
now I should mention we already know what a sleazebag he is, because on his way home.
Oh, I know. I thought you were going to skip over this. Yeah.
I forgot about that. He met a monk and tried to rob from the monk, and the monk clubbed him over the head, which becomes a recurring gag in this movie, is getting clubbed over the head.
Yeah, concussions are a reoccurring theme for this bastard.
Yeah. So Olympio, they end up by some barn where there's a woman, and he basically tries to rape her.
I know, and it's hideously. I mean, this is typical of the time, but it's treated as a joke.
Yeah, but then the monk rescues her by clubbing him over the head again, I think.
Yes.
But then, and then the monk proceeds to.
Well, then the monk sweet talks her into having sex with him.
Yeah, he needs to show her what kind of sins to avoid, I think, is the justification. Is like, this is a sin. I'm going to show you what it is so that you know not to do it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then so they, and
And then we'll
but
do
then
it
she's like,
again after we've
yeah.
rested, so that you're positive that you know what it
And
is.
then again, and like he's putting his clothes back on, and she says, "Oh, you need to show me again," or something. There's a yeah, he's quite an interesting monk, and the monk will pop up several times in the movie.
Yeah.
So Olympio doesn't get it there. He doesn't get it when he gets home, and then meanwhile having problems with the miller who has been trying to divert the river from his land to feed his crops. So there's this ongoing dispute, and so he's going to try and sort it out with the what was his name? Like the
Who, the miller?
no, the like the wise man of the town or the mayor of the town
Oh,
who
yeah.
was going to help him, and he suggests when he explains his sexual frustration to this mayor or whoever he was, he basically suggests that he should just use his servant boys because that's what he does.
Yes. They're just the casual way in which this
Yeah,
type of information is imparted is hilarious.
yeah,
It's one of those odd asides that reminds you that none of this is to be taken seriously or in any way, shape, or form.
and and also, I mean, you can see why this film could cause a lot of offence, and
Oh yeah.
it will probably never get a full Blu-ray restoration by somebody like Severin or something like that, because I
Well,
just think they'd be afraid of the kickback from it.
I don't know. I mean, one has to think that surely people who would be interested in seeing these movies are aware of their time and place. I mean,
Yeah,
one has to one has to know what you're looking at. I mean, it's not as if these movies were made in 1992 or 2002. These movies were made in the early 70s. The attitudes and the especially in any Catholic society, the attitudes are going to they're going to be of the time. I mean, they're not we're not replicating something something modern. This is these things
yeah.
have to be taken as what they
So
were, and this is
yeah,
just to do otherwise is ridiculous in my opinion.
but there is, as well as the sort of accusations of misogyny, there is also yeah, casual homophobia
Oh,
sprinkled through
of course.
quite liberally in the film. But anyway, but let's not try and get too hung up on that. So
Well, because
uh,
the films certainly aren't built to sustain any kind of
no,
discussion of that with seriousness. No.
not really. Olympio falls madly in lust with Ubalda when he meets her, the
Hmm.
miller's wife, and he starts to fantasize about her and try and figure out ways that he can get his wicked way with her. She, of course, also has a chastity belt on, um, but is also somehow still has the key
Yes.
and is having affairs with other people as well. Um, I didn't. Yeah, it's all very liberal. Um, so I so so
It's all very I don't know how reality based is it, but it's all very very much in the vein of nobody's going to stick to these rules, and everybody's going to
no,
pretend that they're sticking to these rules. So
yeah,
yeah.
and so Olympio and Odorisi can't settle their dispute, um, but then Olympio just becomes obsessed with Ubalda, and I think this is where we get to the dream sequence.
Yeah.
um, Olympio lying in bed next to his wife, who still won't let him near her, and he dreams instead of Ubalda. Now, this is the point where the film starts to look like it was shot by Russ Meyer. Um, I mean, the whole film, the way I described it was, it's as if Russ Meyer directed a Carry On film.
That's not a bad way to put it.
Not necessarily one of the good Carry On films either, but anyway. Um, but yeah, so then we get to this kind of extraordinary dream sequence, which goes on for ages. It's like they used every single piece of footage they shot.
Yes.
They didn't cut a single frame. So would you like to describe Olympio's dream sequence?
I will be brief. It is essentially Olympio imagines himself in a beautifully shot countryside area with trees and fields, where he comes across the beloved Miss Fenech, his neighbor's wife. There is a fair amount of lust in the eyes. There is some disrobing, and there is a slow motion chase toward the camera, with the young lady in front, with all that would entail. Now imagine this sequence drawn out as long as you can imagine it,
Yeah.
and then imagine it longer because it's in slow motion, and then imagine what this would do to your average male audience member in the year in which it was released in 1972.
And imagine that this was on a cinema screen.
Yes.
So this is like 30 foot high or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe not that high, 30 foot wide.
Close enough.
But, this wasn't just on a little computer screen with a file that we had to download off the internet. This was being projected on film. It's
this was 40
extraordinary.
feet high. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary to imagine a mainstream audience going to see a comedy as well.
Well, and
so it's
understand, it's
like
beautifully
a family
shot. It's gorgeous. It is beautifully photographed. The cinematography is lovely. They clearly spent, a long time making sure that this was going to look as beautiful as possible. Plus,
I bet they did.
Yeah. I mean, because I think
sorry, Edwige, could you just do that bit again? We just need to do another take.
Well, I mean, just to the point where I have seen Edwige in a lot of movies, and she don't get me wrong, she's an extraordinarily beautiful woman. She's an extraordinarily beautiful woman to this day. She's gorgeous, but during her heyday of the 70s. This is one of the most attractive I have seen her. Her features are naturally absolutely gorgeous, and there's something about the way they're photographing her, and I'm sure it has something to do with clever makeup artists as well, so that she's photographed in the most incredible ways possible. The light looks great. Her eyes are just they're these. That's one of her secrets. Let's be clear. She has these wonderful large eyes, and anything they can do with makeup to draw attention to these gorgeous, very expressive eyes. And now it sounds as if I'm talking about something I'm not. I am. I'm talking about the eyes on her face. I swear to God that I am. Not something lower down. But she is. I mean, literally, if you're just looking at her from the neck up, she's just strikingly attractive, and they have gone out of their way to make this slow motion sequence the centerpiece that it is for the attention and the memory of anybody who ever sees this movie.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's a pretty extraordinary sequence.
Yeah,
and she is good. You can see why she was used in comedies, because she is pretty funny as well. And
well, that's just it. We should point out that she was a very talented woman.
Yeah,
this is someone whose screen career was not just based on her physical beauty and her willingness to disrobe. She's got talent.
Yeah, and she's constantly looking very demure. And virginal. She's got to protect. It's all about protecting their honor in those days. So she's got that look, but then she's also got the kind of side eye towards her lovers, and she's got a lot of. She has to do a lot of expression with not a lot of dialogue some of the times, and she does it very well.
Yeah, a lot of physical acting. She's very good at.
So of course, Olympio is so struck with this dream that he leaps on top of his wife and twangs against her chastity belt and wakes up in pain. So he hatches a plan. How's he going to get to sleep with Ubalda? That's his goal. And so he turns up at Odorisse's house dressed as an artist with the worst blonde wig and stick-on beard you've ever seen.
I love the mustache, which is this bizarre giant blonde curly Q thing. Yeah.
He's prancing around. He's being very camp and openly gay, and sort of giving Odorisse the eye, whilst explaining that he's been sent by the local nobleman to paint Ubalda, and so this is his plan, that he has to paint her naked. And and he even gets the chastity belt key at this point, and so he manages to persuade them that this is all genuine, and they go and lock themselves in Ubalda's room, and he immediately starts kissing her, but then when he pulls back, she's wearing the moustache, which is pretty funny. But
that's actually a good gag, yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't last very long, and the husband, who's outside, they've locked the door, but he's outside and he starts to know what's going on. And anyway, he discovers that it's Olympio, and he chases him off. I think they all fall out of the window in a kind of comedy fashion. So Olympio is trying to figure out what can he do, and then he meets the monk, and the monk helps him to hatch a plan in between teaching somebody else lessons of love, I think, and sin. He helps Olympio with a plan, and it basically involves using the real artist that he just pretended to be and persuading that artist that he has to go and ask to paint Ubalda. So of course he does, and Oderisi thinks it's Olympio again and beats him up. But this gets him into trouble with the real local lord, whatever his name was.
Yeah.
And and he ends up swinging in a cage outside the castle. And he's really mad because he knows that he was set up by Olympio. So he's going to get his revenge. He eventually manages to get out, and he decides that what he's going to do to get his revenge is... Oh, no, wait, I'm missing a bit. I think whilst Oderisi is in prison still, Olympio... What does he do? He comes to the house.
They end up in the cesspit together.
Oh, yeah, but I'm trying to remember how he gets there. So Ubalda is in bed with her lover, and they think they hear her husband coming home. So her lover leaps under the bed, but it's actually Olympio coming up the stairs, hoping to get some time with Ubalda whilst her husband's away in prison. So the lover jumps out and basically should have killed him. He whacks Olympio over the head with a spiked mace. There is blood.
They think he's dead.
So they dump his body in a cesspit, which is, this incidentally is there's a little bit of a reference there to the original Decameron. There is a sequence in Decameron where somebody falls into a cesspit. So Olympio is dead. His suit of armor is on the floor in her bedroom. And then meanwhile, Oderisi comes back and he finds the suit of armor, and he finds out that they killed Olympio, and he's in the cesspit. And he takes the suit of armor, puts it on, and even though he's really fat compared to Olympio, he sneaks into Olympio's wife's house, pretending to be Olympio, to get into bed with her. But then meanwhile she's in bed with her lover, and her lover hides.
One of them. So yeah.
Oh yeah, because hasn't she got? Oh yeah, I totally forgot. There's a bit at the beginning of the film where she's got lovers hidden in barrels.
Oh, they're stashed all around the house. Yes,
I'd forgotten that. Yeah. That's quite funny. Actually, I'd forgotten that bit. So yeah. Anyway, so she's got lovers on tap, and when she realizes that it's not Olympio but it's Oderisi, the lover jumps out and smacks him over the head, and they think they've killed him, and they dump him in the cesspit.
Yep.
And then we cut to inside the cesspit, and they're both alive and annoyed, and they get out and they have a big fight in a river, and they clean themselves up, and
they make common cause.
Yeah, they call a truce, and they realize that what they both want is each other's wives.
Yep.
Which seems fair enough. So they kind of suggest that what they should do is just have a swap. So,
which is I would think of as a modern way of looking at this particular predicament that they found themselves in. But who knows? I'm sure it was fairly common, whether it was acknowledged or not.
Yeah, their wives don't get a say in it at all.
No, well that would have been true in Italy in 1972 as well as back in the 14th century. So yes.
So they swap their keys for the chastity belts, and they go on a picnic. And this is their great plan, that they're going to sleep with each other's wives they're going to sort of split off into different fields, and of course that plan doesn't work either, because it turns out the wives are game, but they haven't given each other the right keys.
Yes.
They've tried to cheat each other basically by giving them the wrong keys. And there's a couple of funny scenes where the women are just lying there with their skirts up over their waists, looking bored, while the men are fiddling around with these keys trying to get the chastity belts off. So they realise that they've both cheated each other, and there's another fight at that point. And then they realise they call a truce again. They realise they've got to do it properly. But then we see them both separately go and visit Maestro Deodato, who makes all these chastity belts.
Yes.
And could you describe for us, Rod, the 3 different chastity belts that he demonstrates? He's got some new ideas.
Oh my God, yes. Let's just say that some of them are more cruel than others. Some of them, shall we say, would allow for entry, but only one time.
Yeah. And to demonstrate this, he uses cucumbers.
Yes. So that we can see how shall we say, something would be removed from the penetrator. So
it's
yes,
pretty eye-watering. But the fact that one of them doesn't spring until you pull out seems pretty funny to me. If these are supposed to protect chastity, they don't really quite.
They don't
they've got it
seem
the
to
wrong way
fit that
around.
bill. No, they seem to protect. They don't seem to protect much at all.
No, it's more about punishment. And you've got to feel sorry for the women who. Well, let's not try and think too much about the physicality of what's going to happen there. But so anyway, so it turns out both of these men buy these things, and then cut to shots of the outside of their houses at night, and we just hear the snap and a scream because they both bought the kind of the guillotine chastity belt device that only goes off when you pull out.
Yes.
And we hear it from both houses. So, oh dear. I mean, really, you'd just bleed to death and die, right? Sure.
Correct. Unless you immediately, shall we say, staunched the blood in one of the most painful, especially in that time period, you would have to apply, shall we say, quite a bit of heat.
Blag. Okay. So sorry for all the sorry for the imagery that's now in all your heads, everybody. Cut to a church service and a choir of a group of choir boys, and the camera pans across, and we've got 2 castrati, both we've got Olimpio and Odorisi singing their little hearts out, singing the most high-pitched solos, whilst their wives are in the congregation singing and smiling at their lovers across the church.
Yes.
The end.
Yes, the end.
And so it's hard because the plot is not really that important to the film. It's more, I mean, the actor Piper Franco, he is funny, and there's a lot of funny business going on, as well as some quite offensive business going on. So it's almost like the story itself is kind of secondary to what's happening on screen at any one time.
Oh, well, the story is simply a clothesline on which they hang all these comedic sequences. That's all. That's the only reason it exists, is to get from one comedic piece to the next. Yeah.
So what did you think of it overall?
In general, definitely not my cup of tea. Let's put it this way. This is the most, not that you have not, if you've listened to our conversation, you're going to have surmised this already. These are the humor in this film is primarily, we're talking like 85%, just the crudest, most lowbrow humor imaginable. It's broad, it's obvious. You're going to if you're beneath the age of 25, maybe you're coming to this film, some of these jokes are not going to be obvious. If you're over the age of 30, you have seen or told every one of these jokes in one form or another, simply because you're a human being working around in the actual world around you. And so these are it's not difficult to anticipate where any particular scene is going to go. It's the most obvious joke every time. And so it just boils down to how much you enjoy well, this kind of comedy, a broad comedy of this type, whether you're game for this type of humor, and if you feel that that the people creating this comedy are pulling it off in a way that that is surprising or interesting, or it has something that it brings to the table.
Yeah.
And
no pun intended there.
yeah, really. Well, the thing to me, if I have to admit, these are not my kinds of films. And by that I mean broad comedies. The broad comedy in general, if there's, and this may be one of the reasons that Italian comedies really don't work for me in general, is that the funniest things to me are the ones where people are setting things up verbally, and there's something going on behind the eyes as opposed to simply exterior humor. And if you can work a combination of those things where there's something extraordinarily funny being imparted verbally and something funny being done visually at the same time, then to my mind you're hitting it out of the park. But if you go too far in the direction of it all being incredibly obvious visual stuff, then I have a tendency to kind of check out because I can see it all coming and it doesn't become funny to me, it becomes laborious. This movie often gets in that, it moves in that direction far too often. Like I say, there's about 15% of the humor in this movie that I was actually laughing about, that caught me off guard or made me think that there was something going on behind the character's eyes, that it wasn't just, like I say, a series of very obvious funny sequences being strung together with the intent of filling up 90 minutes. But so in general, I'm not a fan of Italian comedies. This film doesn't change my mind about that. Like I say, I mean, it wasn't dreadfully painful to watch, but the point during every sequence of high comedy, when it's really clear what is going to happen next, it's like, okay, let's just come on, get to it.
See, I think I'm a bit more warm towards these kind of films because I was raised on the Carry On movies. Yeah, and there's a lot of similarities. Although the Carry On films were never as sexy as this.
Well, no, they would not have been allowed, I'm sure.
A couple of names to mention, but something I wanted to mention was the music for this film, which I'm going to put some music into the podcast.
Oh, great score.
The music is in my head on a loop. Do-do, 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 over and over again, all day today. Bruno Nicolai did the score, and I think it's funny that it reminded me of because they're kind of going for a Middle Ages, I should say, kind of vibe. But then if you listen closely, you can hear kind of wacka wacka guitar on it as well. Yes. So it's like Middle Ages.
It's a comedy, so
it's very 70s. It reminded me of the music. I might put some of this in as well if I can find a suitable piece. Reminded me of the music from The Goodies, which is like whatever the music had to convey, there was always wacka wacka guitar in the background.
Runs like a tiger, jumps like a deer, and growls like a grizzly bear. 10 sharp toes, a little pink nose, covered all over with fur. A whole lot of cat. Kitten Kong, kitten Kong, kitten Kong, kitten Kong. Look out, 'cause Kitten Kong's gonna get you. Kitten Kong, kitten Kong, kitten Kong. Kitten Kong.
that made me laugh. But yeah, the music is quite an earworm. You mentioned the producer of the film. I just thought we should mention it was Luciano Martino.
Yeah.
And that's Sergio Martino's brother, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So he's responsible for loads of films that people are probably more familiar with. Yeah, so overall, well, we didn't even mention the name of the director of this one, Mariano Laurenti, who mainly did comedies that we've never heard of.
Yes, lots and lots with titles like Naughty Nun.
Yeah.
And The Nurse in the Military Madhouse. I mean, you kind of get the idea.
He did a few with Edwige Fenech. And he did The School Teacher Goes to Boys High and the High School Girl Repeating Class, How to Seduce Your Teacher. Real classics of the genre. I wanted to just quickly mention one other film that I did get a chance to have a brief look at, called Una Cavalla Tutta Nuda, which translates as The All Naked Horse.
Okay.
This one stars Barbara Boucher, again, someone else we know better for Giallo, who also appeared in all these comedies. And this one is interesting because they spun a whole feature film from one of the short stories that is actually in Decameron. And so there's a story in Decameron where I'm going to use the Wikipedia summary to sort of describe it, because Decameron's got some pretty weird stuff in it. It's mainly all about sex in one way or another. So there's a couple who have a guest staying with them, and the guest somehow makes them believe that his horse is a woman. I think he says it's his wife or something, that he can basically turn her into a horse so that she can give him rides and do work for him and so on. And so the husband and wife have a conversation together, and they think, well, if he can turn me into a horse, she says, then I could sow the fields on the farm and work for you, and it would be really great. So this husband and wife, they go and persuade this guy to turn her into a horse. So he says, okay, and it can only happen with a special spell. So the spell involves him stripping her naked in front of her husband, making her get on her hands and knees like a horse, and then he sort of makes incantations whilst touching her all over her body and telling her how each part of it is going to become part of a horse. And then at the end he says he's going to give her a tail, and you can probably imagine how he's going to give her a tail.
It does come to mind, yeah.
And then I think they scream at that point, that she screams that she doesn't want a tail, and then that's the end. And so she gets off, she stands up and he gets off, and the husband screams and he says, well, now you're never going to be a horse, it won't work anymore. And that's the end of that. So that's just one of the sequences in the Decameron. So with Una Cavalla Tutta Nuda, they've actually made a whole film comedy out of that one short story. So I was able to find a copy of this film. It's actually a very good quality print, but there are no subtitles at all. So, but I did manage to find that sequence where they recreate that story with Barbara Boucher. So what the rest of the film is about, I don't know, but there is a 5-minute sequence where she is on her knees and he's doing the whole thing about turning her into a horse. So that's one that I did find that is directly connected to Decameron. But there are so many others. I've just got a few titles here that I'm going to mention of some of the fake Decameron films. So I already mentioned there was Decameron 2. There's...
Which is the one that Pasolini sued.
Yeah. And I think Camille Keaton was in that one. There was a Decameron 3, also known as Boccaccio's Most Beautiful Women. There was one called Secret Decameron, or Pranks, License and Love from the Secret Decameron.
Oh, and we should point out that we should point out to people that the reason there were so many knockoffs of Pasolini's film is these things made a lot of money.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, a lot of money.
I think this was the beginning of the sexy comedy genre in Italy.
It does seem to have kind of
yeah,
jump started it in a way. Yeah.
they started with these and then got into the more contemporary ones like The School Teacher and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But this was this was where they realized that they could put sex and comedy together, and quite explicit sex and comedy together. So yeah, you've got Hot Nights from Decameron, Decameron Probitissimo. There's loads. I won't read them all out because it's painful to hear me say them probably. But so that's just the ones that are directly inspired by Decameron. So meanwhile, of course, Pasolini is prepping on his next film the following year, which is going to be Canterbury Tales. So, and some people knew that he also had Arabian Nights up his sleeve. So the Italian film industry, being so quick, they started getting ready. So they were ready to leap on that and bring out Canterbury Tales films and Arabian Nights films. So in our next episode, we're going to hit the Canterbury Tales. So that's the plan. Is we'll look at that, and there's a couple of Canterbury Tales films that I found that we can pick between. So, but yeah, I just think it's interesting that again, is this the sex comedy, the Italian sex comedy is a tough genre, and if you're not Italian.
Yeah.
But I think looking at it from the perspective of the Decameron is kind of an interesting way in. So hopefully it's an interesting way in.
Well, I find it fascinating just as a way of looking at the history of this particular of just the exploitation stuff produced in Italy. I mean, this is a big part. This is a part that, in general, those of us who are much more interested in thrillers and horror movies and that type of filmmaking, we tend to ignore. But there's a lot of crossover, not just in the people who made them, but also the actors and, of course, all the people involved in these things. I mean, you singled out the score for good reason, because I know Bruno Nicolai from a blue bajillion scores for lots of different movies, from westerns and thrillers and horror movies, and I think he's phenomenal. And I would never run across this score at the very least if I took nothing else from this film. Having run across that score, which you're right it can be quite an earworm, that's a plus. But by ignoring this bizarre thread of sex comedies. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm never going to be a gigantic fan of the genre as a whole, but it is interesting to kind of do a survey over them and look at them as what they were, because they do tend to feed into the stuff that we love as well, in ways that, honestly, if you're not looking at them at least a little bit, it's invisible to you, and it's a good idea to get a sample of them to kind of understand what was kind of going on around all the things that you love more.
Sure. I mean, just looking at Bruno Nicolai in a 2-year period around this film, he also did The Red Queen Kills 7 Times, Your Vice is a Locked Room, Case of the Bloody Iris, The French Sex Murders, All the Colours of the Dark, She Killed in Ecstasy,
right.
The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, The Case of the Scorpion's Tail. I'm not reading all of them. That's just some of the ones that he did in that sort of 2-year period. Just like so many of the Italian people working in the industry at that time, they just never stopped. It's quite amazing the amount of work the sort of level of work that they were at all the time.
Well, I have to say that at first I was honestly leery about diving into these things, because I don't have the affection for them that I have for a lot of the other genre stuff produced in Europe in this period. But at the same time, now I'm very glad that you have, simply because anything that inflates my knowledge, anything that gives me any more information to play around with in this stuff is a big positive as far as I'm concerned. Anything that helps me to look at this with a fresh perspective, and so that I'm hoping that other people take that away from this as well. Where it's you definitely aren't going to sit down and do two or three of these in the course of a day, because you would quickly bang your head against the nearest table, at least if you're of my sensibilities. But at the same time. A sampling of them every now and then, like you say, this kind of mini, this kind of mini series that we're planning here is a good idea, because it does enhance what you know about the other stuff that you enjoy more.
And your dreams will never be the same again.
Well, I have had reoccurring dreams of a certain type about Edwige for decades now. And so,
That's
yes,
true.
they now have a different tinge. I'll grant you that.
Yeah.
They now involve the occasional chastity belt, so that's not bad.
Yeah, that's true. And on that note, I think we'll say thank you for listening, and do come back next time for some Canterbury Tales chat. Rod, thank you for once again diving into the world of Italian comedy for me. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you everybody for listening. We will talk to you all again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Very good. Oh, quite musical at the end there as well.
Oh, I didn't mean to. It just happened that way.
Very good.
Yeah. All right.